Hello and welcome. I'm Sian, I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm going to talk today about the difference between a trauma response and your intuition and how you can tell the difference. Because it can be really hard when you've come from a background of childhood trauma, of emotionally immature parenting, to be able to trust yourself and trust your instincts. And I think especially when you are in the early phases to mid-range phase of healing, you're in this limbo where you're aware that actually a lot of what you might think, feel, do is driven by your trauma and is in effect a trauma response and is really rooted in something that you've had to learn how to do or adapt or cope with because of your childhood environment. So you're aware of this, but then that leaves you wondering, well, is this decision or is this reaction, this response, something that's rooted in that trauma or in my early childhood? Or is this actually what I authentically think and feel, and is this an authentic response to the situation? So first of all, let's talk about why childhood trauma or emotionally immature parenting can lead to this kind of confusion. So we are all born with a connection to our intuition and our instincts. It's part of how we survive in the world. It links to really basic things like just knowing what is safe and what isn't safe, moving away from something when we need to move away. It's linked into our fight or flight system. When something doesn't seem right or okay, we kind of come online more, we go into more of a high alert state. So we're born with this. This is a kind of natural inbuilt mechanism as a human. However, if you found yourself in an environment where your emotions were punished, because intuition and emotions are really, really strongly linked, we kind of can't have one without the other, right? If we're having an emotional response to something, then we are also having some sort of reaction to it. And that's quite instant, it's quite automatic. And that's really what our instincts are all about. And our intuition is kind of built up off our instincts. So if you found yourself in an environment where you couldn't express your emotions freely, maybe your emotions were punished, or maybe you perceived that your emotions were being punished. Sometimes parents think they're punishing a behaviour, but that isn't really the message that the child receives. That is going to distort and disrupt your trust in your own emotions, because when you have a reaction to something and it's not validated by the adults around you, and namely by your parents, because those are the people that hold the most weight for us as children, when your emotions aren't validated, that's going to make you question how you're feeling, make you question whether the way you feel is correct or not. And then if we add into that the fact that emotionally immature parents often create households and family dynamics that don't really make sense because they're coming off of their own trauma, right? They're a kind of recreation. If you had two emotionally immature parents, for example, then what you would have experienced is the combination of the unresolved trauma and the unresolved unhealthy dynamics from their individual families growing up that would just be reenacted and colliding, essentially. And then you would have been caught in the middle of all of that. And so as a child, you would have had to find a way to kind of get on board with an environment that didn't really make sense, an environment that maybe felt unsafe, emotionally unsafe, or maybe physically unsafe, an environment where there were a lot of discrepancies, right? These incongruences where your mum maybe would say one thing but do something completely different, or where there was there were some areas where there were constant things that didn't quite add up, that didn't quite make sense to you. And you would have had to find a way to make that make sense. And in order to do that, you would have had to suppress your intuition. You would have had to suppress your instinct, suppress that part of you that's saying, this isn't safe, these people aren't safe, but you had to do that because what was the alternative? If at 6 years old, you listen to that intuition and you conclude that your caregivers are not safe and are not reliable and are not steady and sturdy leaders, which is what you would have needed, if you conclude that, then where does that leave you? So you would have had to have constantly been suppressing your intuition at some level. It's also true that in these kinds of households, when you are being your authentic self, when you are expressing something that you think, that you feel, it can be met with a lot of shame, it can be met with a lot of invalidation, being dismissed, being mocked. And so it would have become literally unsafe to, and when I'm saying unsafe, I'm meaning kind of emotionally unsafe to be yourself. And if you can't be yourself, then you are suppressing at a very broad level all of your instincts. And so then when we get to adulthood, it becomes really hard to know which part is you and which part is the trauma response, which part is the coping strategies and the things that you had to do and change and become in order to survive your childhood. So let's talk about how to tell the difference. Trauma responses, anything rooted in trauma is rooted in fear, basically. And so decisions that are made that are informed by your traumatic experiences, by your emotionally unsafe experiences, are going to feel chaotic, they're going to feel fast, too fast, quick, rushed. There's going to be an energy that comes with them that is a bit scary, that's a bit frightening. And this can get confused with also feeling a bit exciting. It's hard to pick apart those two if you've had a lot of lack of safety in your childhood. But that's not to say that excitement isn't valid and authentic as well. It absolutely is. But often our intuition is the opposite of those things. Our intuition. We can be excited about something, excited about an experience, and you know, enjoy that feeling. But intuition, an intuitive response, an intuitive decision is typically steady. It is based in a deep knowing, and it makes complete sense to you. And it's normally an all-body experience rather than just in your head. Trauma, yes, it lives in our body, but we tend to manage it in our head. We manage it with our worries. We manage it with rumination. We manage it with thinking, because that normally becomes more comfortable than feeling all of those horrible sensations in our body. And so a trauma response is normally one of thinking. It's what you think, and there will be probably patterns of kind of going round and round about something, of worrying about it a lot, going back and forth in your head. Whereas with intuition, it's really kind of all over in your mind, in your body. It's there and it feels safe and it feels right and it feels connected. And in that sense, it's an embodied experience when you have an intuitive response about something. Because really our intuition and instinct are really closely linked, and our instincts come from our body. They're not something that we think about. We don't decide what our instincts are. They just are there. They just appear, and then it's our job to notice them, really, and just to pay attention to them. It's not a choice. Whereas when we're having a response or making a decision that's based in trauma, we are having to do a lot of work because we are trying to actively control it and think about it. With intuition, we really don't need to do that. So that is the the main way to tell the difference. And hopefully that's helpful, just so that you can maybe reduce a bit of confusion about this. And I also think that as you heal more, the more you move towards yourself and your authentic self, and the more you clear through those childhood experiences, then it does become easier to just know yourself, to know your instincts, and most importantly, to trust yourself, because that's really the part that gets so damaged in childhood trauma and as a result of emotionally immature parenting. So thank you for listening, and do come back and take a look at more episodes all about childhood trauma, emotionally immature parenting, and how to heal from them. Take care.